So, we're gonna start with stories that, okay, they might be fiction, but they act as these creepy, chilling reflections of some very real and very strange stuff that's actually happening. Think of it like a terrifying echo you hear in the static of the internet.
Okay, first up, an absolute classic of internet horror, the Rake. The legend is simple but terrifying. A monster, kinda humanoid, that comes into your room at night. But the reality? Well, that's where things get a lot more unsettling than you might think.
So you gotta understand, the Rake started out as a creepypasta. That's basically just a scary story that people cook up together online. It was 100% meant to be fiction, and the details are so specific, right? This pale, super skinny creature that just watches you while you sleep. I mean, it's the perfect recipe for a digital campfire tale.
But this is where it gets so weird. In the years after this fictional story was created, real, actual, high-quality photos from trail cams started popping up, and they show these things, unidentified, emaciated, humanoid figures out in the woods. Experts have no idea what they are, but they look disturbingly similar to the monster from the story.
Let's move on to our next echo in the static. This one's a video. It's known as Blank Room Soup. For the longest time, it was passed around as just this bizarre, creepy piece of performance art. But it turned out to be a really dark reflection of something much, much more sinister.
The video itself is just deeply unsettling. You see this person in a strange, kind of sad-looking mask, and they are clearly distressed, being forced to just intensely eat this bowl of soup by these figures who are just off camera. For years, the internet just argued about what it could be, and most people landed on, oh, it's gotta be some weird art project.
But here comes the dark twist. While nobody really knows where that specific video came from, international police later confirmed the existence of actual criminal rings on the dark web. And guess what they were doing? This exact kind of masked psychological torture. That art project turned out to be a blueprint for real crimes.
So, we've seen these myths that kind of echo reality. But now, let's look at how fictional stories and hoaxes were actively taken and weaponized to create real, tangible danger in the world.
You've probably heard of the Blue Whale Challenge. At first, it was reported as a total hoax, right? A moral panic just meant to scare parents. But the terrifying truth is that the hoax itself became a weapon.
The whole structure of the so-called game was just horrifying. Some anonymous admin would find a vulnerable person and assign them one task a day for 50 days. And it would start with something small, totally harmless. But really quickly, the tasks would escalate to self-harm, building up to the final task, take your own life.
And the tragic reality is this: even if the original story was a hoax, malicious groups saw the idea and they ran with it. They used that exact framework to groom vulnerable teens, and it led to hundreds of verified suicides around the world.
All right, so from a modern hoax, let's go to a vintage legend. Polybius. This was supposed to be this mythical arcade game from the 80s, rumored to be some government experiment that caused seizures and suicidal thoughts. It sounded like a wild conspiracy theory, until, well, it didn't.
The timeline is where this goofy urban legend gets chillingly real. So, the story just kind of floats around for decades. Then, declassified documents from the CIA's Project mkultra are finally released to the public. And what do they show?
Okay, so let's be super clear. Was there an arcade game actually named Polybius? Probably not. But the core of the legend, the idea that the US government was using electronic devices in public places to experiment with mind control on everyday people, that part was absolutely 100% true.
So we've seen echoes, we've seen weaponized hoaxes, but this last story, this is the most terrifying of all. This is where that line between fiction and reality wasn't just blurred, it was completely shattered.
We're talking about Slender Man. And this story is different because the monster wasn't some echo of reality or a repurposed hoax. The fictional character itself became the reason for a brutal, horrifying act of violence. And what's so wild about this one is that we know exactly where it came from. There's no mystery. Slender Man was literally created on a forum for a Photoshop contest. It was a fun, collaborative, creative writing project. Everybody involved knew it was just a story. But then, in 2014, two 12-year-old girls lured their friend into the woods. This right here, this is a direct quote from their police confession. They did it, they said, as a sacrifice. They truly believed this fictional monster was real and that by killing for him, they could become his servants.
And this was the cost of that belief. They stabbed their friend 19 times. I mean, miraculously, she survived. But a fictional character, created for fun on the internet, had just become the direct motivation for attempted murder.
So after all that, what do we take away from these digital nightmares? Well, there seems to be this terrifying pattern of escalation that happens when these stories leave the screen and enter our world.
Think about it. We started with stories like the Rake, creepy, unsettling echoes. Then we moved to the Blue Whale Challenge, where a hoax was actively used to cause real harm. And we ended with Slender Man, where fiction became a direct, violent motive. The connection just gets stronger and way more dangerous at each stage.
You know, these cases show us that the internet isn't just a library of stories. It's a machine for manufacturing belief. It taps into our shared fears, our need to belong, and just how vulnerable we all are to suggestion. In an age of deepfakes and AI-driven realities, that line between a story and its consequence is thinner than it has ever been. Which really leaves us with one final and pretty vital question. If stories have this much power, what myth are we all creating and agreeing to believe in right now? And what's its real-world outcome going to be?